Hi guys, and welcome to our last unit for plants, and we are looking at vascular seed plants and angiosperms. So that means angiosperms means that they have flowers. So they're vascular seeded plants with flowers. And really quickly, as you can imagine from our cladogram, is that last plants that we're going to cover. You notice that they have all the traits. You probably remember me saying that angiosperms evolutionized in the planet along with insects and other animals. So if you notice here, they are the 75 over percent of the plant species today are angiosperms. So the majority of the plants that you see, they might not even look like angiosperms, like for example, Spanish moss, but they do produce flowers. Um, so they're the ruling plant today, and that's very different than how it used to be. So a few more things about angiosperms. So as you know, they have vascular tissue, so they're able to move things around, goods, water, supplies. They also have seeds, as you know, like gymnosperms, but this times they have flowers, and they're different types of angiosperms, monocot or eudicot. And notice that there's a few differences between the two. So one of the main differences, this is pronounced cotyledon. So cotyledon is the way the shape of the seed and the contents of the seed are built. And so in a monocot, you have a single cotyledon, meaning you have only, it's made out of one piece, like the corn kernel. And in an eudicot, you have a double cotyledon, meaning there's like two sections to the cotyledon and in the seed. You can split it in half in a weird way. And there's other differences. So monocots, if you look at the leaves, they're very different. They have parallel lines and they have flowers with 3 petals. But eudicots have zigzag patterns in their lines for their leaves, and they have 4 or 5 petals. Okay, so you are going to be doing a dissection for the flower, but I just wanted to do a quick introduction that you will study this in detail in a moment. I will ask you to pause the video and do the dissection virtual. But you have a stamen. I wanted to mention 2 things. There's a female and a male part in the flower. So as you know, we've been talking on the other types of plants. You have pollens, and it may not be so visible where the female and the male parts are. But in flowering plants, the majority of the time they're very easy to see. Another point is that not all plants, not all flowers have male and female parts. Some flowers have only male parts, and some flowers have only female parts. But for the majority of the plants, they have both. So the male part is the stamen, as you can see it over here. So the stamen is the entire thing, and the stamen is divided in two. Is the filament, and then you have the anther. And the anther here is what holds the pollen. And so you will see when you see little bees or animals come, they land over here. And when they fly off, you might notice that a bee has like yellow dots or whatever. Usually these are bright colored and you can see it in insects. So this is where the pollen typically sits. The female part is the pistil. And if you notice, the pistil is this entire organ, and it's pretty large. So one part that is very interesting here is where the ovary is. And I don't know if you know this, but fun fact, fruits generate from the ovary of the plant. So when you're eating a piece of fruit, typically you're eating a mature ovary of a plant. Okay, so there are also different types of angiosperms. So you have the annuals that basically you buy them and you plant them and they're beautiful, and then they die and then you're done. So they're called annuals because they last about a year. There is such a thing as biennial, which basically get pretty strong at first. Then they kind of go into some dormancy, they flower, and then they die off. So you notice here they were getting bigger. And a lot of times you might say, no, I've seen these come back. Well, the pollen, the pollinators will take care of the plants coming back, but the original plant may only last for 1 or 2 years, depending if it's an annual or biennial. And perennial are much bigger. So we think of it as incrementally getting larger. The bigger they are, the longer they're going to need to grow to their largest size, and the more energy that it takes to reproduce, and the more it takes to grow, and the more catastrophes that could kill a lot of these species. So it takes a long time. So typically they're bigger. So that's how you're going to know if they last a long time. You're never going to find an annual that is the size of a tree. So some interesting things here in these pictures. So this is a forest of quaking aspens. So this type of tree, this type of aspen, believe it or not, has been around for 8,000 years. It's a forest in Utah, and so it's like it was whatever one tree that has cloned, and now there's a forest of, and it's basically this forest has been around for about 80,000 years. We have some really old trees in the United States. I'm sure you've heard about redwoods, and here's a bristlecone pine that is over 5,000 years old. So it's pretty cool that perennials can last for that long. Okay, right now I need you to pause your video and to go into, not my Berkeley, but Google Classroom, and complete the dissection for flower, and then come back to return this video because you're going to need the knowledge to go through the reproduction phase. So for the process of reproduction, as you can imagine, angiosperms are even more complex than the other types of plants. So we're going to start here by looking at the flower, and if you can see here, the flower is, so, oh, one more before I start. So this is mostly in the diploid stage, right? So if you can see that by the diagram, the majority of plants spend their lives in the gametophyte stage. So notice that you have here the flower, and you have the stamens and the pistils. So you have still microspores and megaspores that develop. And notice that the microspores are inside the anther, and then the megaspores are inside the ovule. So when you have here, basically what would happen is you would have the pollinators come and deposit the grains of pollen into the ovule. Now there's a sticky material. I'm going to try to keep this very simple for you. There's a sticky material here that allows the pollen to come in and basically stick. And so when this gets, stuck here, this is a pretty complex process. There's like actually multiple cells that travel down that help the sperm go down and fertilize the egg. And once fertilization happens, then you develop the embryo. And then from there, so once you have the embryo, you're gonna have, so once the cell once the sperm enters, then it fertilizes the egg, then the flower is gonna hold on to the seeds. And at that point, there's a lot of variability. So if you think about, for example, fruits that have seeds on them, you would have to eat the fruit in order for that fruit to then go and make new plants. So there's a lot of mechanisms obviously bees and pollen or birds, and nectar. So there's a lot of mechanisms that would then trigger this um, plant to or the seed to then grow and become um, a plant. So a few more things about the flower. So notice that I started here with a flower and I moved on and talked about eggs and sperm. So in the past, we've talked about the different mechanisms of where they occur, where the gametophytes are made. So here, basically, you're making everything. The flower is in charge of making it all. But different types of flower, as you saw in the dissection, are in charge of different parts. So it could be that pollen is made, but there's not an egg ready in the ovary. So this can occur at different times. Okay, one more thing. So important things here. If this pollen is not distributed by someone or in some method, notice that the method of fertilization is more complex, and it's also more complex who delivers the material to where it needs to go. So we need now wind, which was something that we had before, but pollinators is what's really made this process more successful. Um, there's different types of pollination, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. There's actually self-pollination. So certain plants, I don't know if you remember Mendel, who studied pea plants. So pea plants self-pollinate, and as well as legumes, peanuts, which means that um, in these plants, the pollen actually goes into the egg all on its own. So there's no one that needs to insert or bring pollen over to the flower. However, as you can imagine, this reduces the amount of variability. So this is like the same plant fertilizing itself. When we have animal pollination, we have now a wide variety of diversity, because plants can actually cross-pollinate and share, two different plants of the same species with different color flowers, for example, can then blend because an animal either carried it, or an animal ate the fruit and then pooped it, and then that seed traveled, and now it's in a new environment and it's going to cross-pollinate with something different. So that's animal pollination. Can also include animals who eat those fruits and carry it. And then wind pollination, which you are already familiar with, basically is when pollen is carried by the wind. Okay, last thing. When wind is pollinating, is in charge of pollinating, the main I guess, source of pollination. The plants may not have a beautiful flower or a showy flower. Those flowers that you see that are beautiful colors are to attract um, the insects that will come and pollinate it. Okay, if you guys have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.